This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Welcome in and thank you for joining us. This week, Governor Reynolds signed a slew of new laws, including the controversial diversity training ban. The new Iowa law keeps government and Iowa schools from teaching the ideas that the U.S. or state of Iowa is fundamentally or systematically racist or sexist, and that an individual by virtue of race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive either consciously or unconsciously, or that anyone should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of one's race or sex. The argument that's taking shape is whether or not the law takes aim at an academic movement called critical race theory. It's a way of examining social, cultural, and legal issues as they relate to race and racism in America. The teachings are unified by two common themes: that white supremacy exists and maintains power through law, and that transforming the relationship between the legal system and racial power to be more equal for everyone is possible. KCCI's chief political reporter Cynthia Fodor sat down with State Senator Amy Sinclair for a closer look at the conservative perspective.
Can you explain what Republicans' issues or concerns are with critical race theory?
So the bill doesn't actually go into critical race theory at all. The bill says specifically stereotyping and scapegoating related to race or sex. And while that does hearken into critical race theory to some degree, it does not identify critical race theory. It does not identify a specific curriculum. It doesn't do any of that. What it says is that we're not going to take an immutable characteristic of an individual or a group of individuals and say that everyone who is part of that is good or bad.
So you're saying banning critical race theory, it does not accurately describe this law?
No, I don't think it does. And as I say, I think stereotyping and scapegoating are always bad. I think anytime, I define equity as working toward an America where race doesn't matter. It doesn't limit us. It doesn't define us. I hold a definition that racism is it's manifested in behavior, and it's not an immutable characteristic. My race, I have no control over. My sex, I have no control over. For us to allow trainings and curriculum that would define people and limit people by race or sex, frankly, flies in the face of what the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States demands of us. Let's be clear right up front. This bill specifically identifies things that it doesn't do. This bill should not be construed to inhibit or violate the First Amendment rights of teachers and students and employees of state and local governments. It should not be construed to prevent a school district or a government entity or a university or anything from promoting racial, cultural, ethnic, intellectual, or academic diversity or inclusiveness. It doesn't. It doesn't prohibit discussing divisive concepts as part of a larger academic course content, particularly not at the regent level. Frankly, a well-rounded education does include topics that make students uncomfortable to a degree. It shouldn't be construed to be creating any additional rights or benefits. And it doesn't prohibit a state or a federal court or agency from having jurisdiction over trainings where discrimination has been founded. And frankly, beyond that, once it was amended, this bill also it specifically states that it doesn't prevent the conversations about race. It doesn't prevent conversations about historical or current sexism. It doesn't prevent conversations about Jim Crow laws or about slavery. In fact, all of those things are encouraged. We can't blame one group of people on a whole for the actions of people that occurred historically. Cynthia, you and I can't be blamed for how our Black or brown colleagues at work are blamed unless it's on us.
And you're saying unless it's something you as an individual did.
Right. If I as an individual was discriminatory to another person, absolutely I should be held accountable to that. But I as a white woman can't be lumped into a group for this group doing X historically.
So parents on both sides of this are concerned about how this will impact what schools teach. What in your mind is a better way to teach children and adults about how race plays a role in everyday life?
Race does play a role in everyday life. Actually was just participating in a conversation this week about that Using the term colorblind is silly. I don't think any of us are colorblind to anything. I can't relate to the color of my skin per se, but I've been a redhead my entire life. And the first thing people comment on when they meet me is, oh, you must have a temper. You're a ginger. So to say we're colorblind is silly. You can't look at your Black friend and not notice that they are indeed Black. You just can't. But what we do need to do is we need to train and teach students, and we need to train and teach our colleagues in state and local governments that the value of the individual character has worth, and that worth should not be denigrated, demonized based on the color of your skin.
Well, Democrats are arguing that things will never change unless difficult conversations are had. Cynthia gets the other side of the aisle's perspective while speaking with State Representative Ross Wilburn.
Democrats were opposed to this law and argued against it in debate up at the State House. Why was that?
This bill is so broadly written and talks about the notion of divisive concepts. And, Iowa faces some issues where we've got disparate impact on communities of color, women, and part of the main argument that we were making is that in order to address things that happen in the system, systemic discrimination or racism, whether it's intentional or unintentional, the impact that it can have on communities of color, women, people with disabilities, we need to discuss those.
And Senator Sinclair says that it's inaccurate to define this as banning critical race theory, the teaching of it. How do you see that?
It bans teaching of divisive concepts, and that includes concepts like, is the U.S. has some fundamentally racist or sexist policy law in place? And I believe that's an important question to ask ourselves as a society. Systemic racism is very real. It's very real. You have to just look at, for example, in our education system, we've got, or our Department of Corrections, our own data shows that African Americans are incarcerated at a higher rate in Iowa compared to other states. In Iowa, around 4% of the population is Black, and we make up around 25% of the prison population. And it's important to ask ourselves why. That's what structural racism is about. That, again, regardless of whether it's intentional or unintentional, if the law is impacting a certain part of our community, we have to be able to ask ourselves why, and educating each other about it is important. And by putting a broad law is subject to interpretation like this can have a chilling effect on educators and community members as well.
There is an amendment that specified that schools may still teach about sexism, slavery, racial oppression, segregation, or racial discrimination. But even with that, do you have concern that the law will limit conversations?
I do. In fact, I would have to look back at records, but if I'm not mistaken, as it was clear this bill was going to pass, the Department of Education had a diversity training posted available on its website. And I had some teachers contact me saying that training had been canceled. I've not had a chance to talk to the Department of Education, but was it related to this bill, or was it some other concern that had come up about whether the state itself would be breaking this law? So, but teaching about then the fact that racism is embedded in our American legal system, it's not a divisive concept.
And this comes at a time when we've had the Black Lives Matter marches last summer, and trying to reach a place of a better understanding for all. Does this put us closer to that, do you think, in any way, shape, or form? Because Republicans are saying, well, you have to see our point of view in this as well, and that they're hearing from parents whose kids feel shamed and that sort of thing.
And so why not emphasize the importance that we need to have planned conversations if there's discomfort around, discrimination, racism, sexism that's going on. The bottom line is the new law is not designed to prevent indoctrination. That's what they couch this as. It's designed to silence the lived experiences of people of color and women. And the classroom and training seminars, those are sacred spaces where Iowans should feel comfortable enough to engage in transformative conversations about race and sexism. So instead, the governor wants to attack Iowa educators who are already struggling to recover from a pandemic. And she wants to ignore the reality that Black and brown Iowans have a long way to go before they can reach equality in the state.
Well, up next, an exclusive explanation on why the Polk County attorney is calling it a career after 30 years. Well, after 30 years in office, the Polk County attorney will not be running for re-election. John Sarcone talked exclusively with Cynthia about why he's stepping aside.
Sarcone graduated from Drake Law School back in 1975 and spent 30 years trying cases as the Polk County attorney. The pictures still hang in Sarcone's office of the day he took the oath of office, January 3rd, 1991. Over 30 years, he has overseen thousands of cases, child abuse, kidnappings, murder. Looking back, Sarcone says he's proud of all the changes he made, professionalizing the county attorney's office, creating liaisons to help victims through the court process, as well as an elder abuse unit and developing good trial lawyers, hiring more women and minorities. Sarcone recently faced criticism for prosecuting a Des Moines Register reporter who was covering a Black Lives Matter protest. She was acquitted.
I've always been a believer in the jury system, and I always will accept a jury verdict. Because I think in fairness, unless you had somebody who really went in there with an agenda, most people want to do the right thing.
At age 71, he says the right thing for him in the near future is to spend time with his family and 10 grandchildren.
I always looked at it as, am I going to leave things better than what I found it? And I can truly say that what I found when I started and what I'm leaving behind, it's much better than when I started out.
John Sarcone won't be packing up here anytime soon. His 8th term runs through 2022. Cynthia Fodor, KCCI 8 News, Iowa's news leader.
Well, how much of your financial situation can be attributed to your parents or even your grandparents? Up next, a local expert explains how generational wealth is keeping back communities of color here in Iowa and around the country. We'll be right back.
They say when you come from a small town like us,
Well, you probably have thought about money at some point today. You might have spent some already too, but how you spend now can impact your future. Our Rhea Spigner talks to a finance expert about the importance of financial literacy and how it impacts communities differently.
Generational wealth is a concept you may hear, but how many of us are actively thinking about what we can leave behind to our future family or how to do it? Financial literacy is a major key to getting to the how, but as far as access and financial literacy being top of mind, there are clear disparities in Black and brown communities. Disparities that start with social structure, resources, and systems that didn't deliberately cater to Black communities, like mortgage approvals in the early to mid 1900s that was also known as redlining. We talked with finance expert Ephraim Jackson for a close-up view of the trickle-down effect, what you should be looking for, and a good first step to financial literacy. All right, I am here with Ephraim Jackson. He is founder of Freedom Serve Financial Ministries, and it is a pleasure to have you. You recently was a speaker at TEDx Des Moines. And I just want to kind of first pick your brain about why you decided to talk about the generational wealth gap.
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Rhea, for having me here. I appreciate it to have this conversation. And, I think that topic is something that's near and dear to my heart. But the real reason is because it's a topic that's not talked about enough. It's one of those things that people don't realize how deep of an issue the racial wealth gap is and just how rooted that is and how even how that even came to be. So this is one of those things that I just really wanted to get the knowledge out and let people know about this so we can start having the conversation. I think we're in a kind of an age where a lot of people don't want to have those hard conversations, but we got to have a way to have these conversations so that we can start making plans to try to correct some of these issues that keep springing up from our past.
Right. So let's talk about the roots and let's talk about what actually generational wealth is, because I don't think a lot of people maybe don't really understand what is inside of generational wealth, what that actually contains, and how you can pass it down, and how sometimes it gets kind of lost within the generation. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So first, define it for us.
Yeah, so generational wealth, in just straight layman's terms, is the assets that you have. Assets meaning real estate, stocks, investments, funds, monetary funds, things like that you can then pass on to the next generation. So think leaving money for your children's children, right? That old saying, right? You're leaving money for your children's children. That's essentially what it is. But a lot of people don't think about the other components that come into generational wealth. So it's leaving those assets, but it's also oftentimes leaving the knowledge of how to handle those assets. It's leaving businesses. It's leaving networks and connections and things that play into creating wealth and building legacy. So a lot of people who have those networks, you're going to see people that are able to carry wealth from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, because it's kind of like a domino effect. Once you have it and that domino falls, it can kind of just keep going on. But then you have other people in other communities that haven't been able to create that domino effect.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, the disparities in Black and brown communities, because we see, as you said, talking about wealth going down from one place to another. We were talking about this earlier. I was reading an article that said 70% of generational wealth doesn't get passed on. But even so, financial literacy and other resources are primarily lacking in Black and brown communities because of social structure and so many different elements. But let's break that down for us, why that's important, and how do we get started with that in the Black and brown communities?
Yeah. And, if you look at the data that supports and talks about generational wealth, especially in the African-American communities, you look at Federal Reserve data, you can see that the median net worth for Black families sits around $24,000 compared to white households in the U.S. that sits around like $188,000 or so. So there's a huge gap and a huge disparity in that difference between wealth. And so when I think about some of the things that help lead into that, I think access to information, access to resources, it's something about if you had someone in your family, a grandparent, a father, someone that had business and those connections and things that come with it that help you get that extra leg up. Maybe it's paying for college. Maybe it's, helping you to avoid certain debts that is just going to make you much more better off. Maybe it's leaving a home or leaving other assets. So within the Black community, we don't see a lot of those assets being passed. And there's a lot of reasons that we can get into that have caused people to not be able to pass wealth on. But I think it's so important because I always tell people, like, if you don't come from a wealthy family, then a wealthy family has to come from you. So we have to find ways to create wealth and start building wealth and sharing this information.
What are those ways? Because we talk about disparities, and one of them has been redlining, right? Where Federal Housing Administration back in the 1930s deliberately did not give mortgages to African-American people and neighborhoods, which sounds like a system that had intentional racism to me, but I digress. I feel like this is, I guess, the time and the generation to soak in that knowledge. So what are the things that we need to look for in order to progress from systems put in place like that? What are 4 or 5 things that people can start today or right now in order to do that?
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about topics like redlining and make sure people are aware of those, because I think a lot of people don't understand the history that comes behind and why certain communities and certain neighborhoods are the way that they are. So I think one of the first thing is just that, just acknowledging the past, acknowledging what has happened in the past, so that we can try to find ways to correct that. So when I think about what can a person do, I look at it at different levels. So there's at the individual level, and then there's at the institutional kind of government level, right? So at the individual level, number one, educate yourself, get financial literacy, get knowledge, invest time in making sure you understand how our economy works and what drives it. So definitely do that. The next thing I would say is small business income. If one of the driving things for wealth creation and being able to pass things on tends to be around home ownership and being able to have businesses and things that we can start, that we can pass on to the next generation. I definitely highly would encourage people to start investigating these things and start looking at doing different things with your money. Start with something simple. Maybe it's just, starting a budget. If you haven't done a budget before, maybe it's investing in that 401k at work. It has to start with you. Now, on a institutional kind of government level, I believe there's more things that we should be done in terms of programming for first-time home buyers, assistance, things like that we can look at in order to kind of deal with some of those past discrepancies and past issues that we've seen have happened within the Black community.
Okay, so as we wrap up, talk to me about what you've seen here in Des Moines and some words of wisdom as we wrap up this segment.
Yeah, no, I think when I look at Des Moines, as I look across most of America, it reminds me of that Charles Dickens book, A Tale of Two Cities. And so for a lot of individuals, there's one version of Iowa, there's one version of America, and for a lot of other people, there's a totally different version. And so what I've seen is that pans out even right here in the heartland in Iowa as well. The unemployment rate here for African Americans tends to be much higher than the average. The rate of home ownership is much lower than the average. The median income is much lower than the average. So definitely a tale of two cities. And so what I would tell and encourage anyone to do is to become a part of the solution. Find out think about what can I do as an individual to be a part of the solution. Let me educate myself. Let me get the knowledge that I need to improve my own family's finances. And then let me give back to that community. And let me go into those communities that have been historically hindered from creating wealth. And let's find some ways to bridge the gap.
Coming up, drag takes center stage during Iowa's Pride Month. We get a close-up look at what it takes to perform.
Enjoy a slice of the sweet.
A more colorful version of the Des Moines city flag. This pride version will fly through the end of June. As we mentioned last week, this year's Capital City Pride is a month-long celebration. Today we're getting a close-up look at drag. Local performer Chanel Bell explains the profession, starting with how it's different from someone who is transgender.
Yeah, so transgender is actually going through the physical surgeries and making that life change every day. Drag is just kind of a way to express yourself differently than your day-to-day lives, your Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So it gives you that opportunity to express yourself in a different manner and really connect with the community and provide a safe space and yeah, just express yourself. It's a community in its own inside of the LGBTQ, which is super fun. But then when you break it down, you have families. So my name was Chanel Rose, and then I was adopted into the Bell family by Raylan Vitale Bell. And so they kind of go back, if you've ever seen the show Pose, it's kind of a reference to that, the families. But yeah, we just kind of pass the name down and they kind of take you under their wing and show you the ropes. As an artist, you paint your thoughts. We literally do that physically, and we express that physically during our presentations and our numbers. Painting takes me about an hour and a half, and then to get into my body, it takes me about 30 minutes, about 2 hours overall. And when I say body, you're probably like, what's that? So we wear what you are probably sitting at home right now watching this on your couch cushions, we wear as our hip pads. So we take cushion and put it up against our hips, and then we layer our tights on to create a smooth hip. Really just know that we're people too. We live our everyday lives, and we have feelings as well. Sometimes it can kind of turn into like we're an object, and we're not. We're still people, and we want to engage with the community, but in a respectful and professional manner.
Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday.